Yeah, so, oh my goodness, we're gluttons for punishment. So thank you for accompanying Christ in this contemplation. And I hope this is helpful for our Easter time season, right? Where Christ has died and is risen. And the Shroud, I think, helps us contemplate how there is fruitfulness in our lives. And so I want to exposit on this most scientifically studied archaeological object in the history of the world. But not just with the lens of science, but also as a pilgrim, explore the scripture, explore the mystery. And that's how I can propose to proceed. This might be tricky. I'm going to stand on my tippy toes just to see the slideshow myself. But you tell me what's up there, okay? Here it goes. So the central question is, who is the man of the shroud? And it's purposefully phrased as an open question. Because you know, the church doesn't have an official dogma about this. There's no creed that says, I believe in God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and the Shroud of Turin as the burial shroud of Jesus. So let the evidence guide you where it will. I have all the cards on the table. I'm convinced that the shroud is authentic, but not just me. My teacher was Barry Schwartz. We'll have a slide of him in a moment, but Barry Schwartz was a Jew till his dying day, and yet he believed that the shroud was authentic too, and he taught at a pontifical university in Rome, and if I'm here, it's in large part because of him. So let's see where the evidence goes, both for the artifact itself and for the Jesus story as we get it from the evangelist. So I have a slide, but we have the real thing, almost. We have a life-size replica. This I don't always get. I've just come from several other cities in the United States during Holy Week and Easter Week. This is prime time for shroud presentations, as you can imagine. But I don't have the luxury of this. Is Dave Emmett here somewhere?
Right.
There he is, always with a camera in the back. So this gentleman brought this from Fort Myers, built this beautiful frame so that it could be mounted in front of us. I think that deserves a round of applause. Thank you so much. But you don't know what a privilege it is just to see it for its size. And we're going to delve into the particularities here. But what are we looking at? A 14-foot long ancient burial cloth that has not only a blood-stained body imaged on it, but it's not just the blood stains. We see the blood. I'll point them out right away. Can you see my laser? Let's see. Here, barely, right? Okay, so let's see. At the bottom of the feet, at the wrists and down the forearms, at the side of the torso, here at the brow of the head and the nape of the neck. All of this is blood. This you see trickling down the small of the back. And at the base of the feet, we get a full foot. And then the heel of the opposite foot. But you see right away how it's not just bloodstains, but in addition to that is the body. The body is not a bloodstain. And it's a man who's been crucified, crowned, speared in the side, punched in the face, plucked beard, evidence of carrying his patibulum. In other words, a unique set of sufferings that converge upon the Jesus story. And the question is, what made that image? It's a question that remains unanswered even to this day. We don't know of any mechanism. We don't know of any natural means by which that image could be reproduced artificially in a laboratory, despite the fact that the shroud is the most studied archaeological object, despite the fact that there is a handsome cash prize, both in the UK and the United States, for anyone who might reproduce something like the shroud when you look at its chemical composition, when you look at its unique traits. I'm going to dive more deeply into it, but this is the mystery for the scientists. What made that body image? Not just the blood stains, which are easy to understand. Any cadaver that is covered in blood will transfer to a cloth when wrapped. But the body image? What is that? All right, so What are we looking at? I've zoomed in here on the face. And excuse me if it's stretched the proportions on our screen. There's a little technical difficulty. My slideshow is a 9:16, and it's compressing it into a 3:4. Sorry about that. But here you have a proportionate image right here. So look, just this spot. You can see how faint, how ghostly is that image. Okay, so if we could zoom in and rotate 90 degrees, this is what you'd get in the slide. What are we looking at? Is that the face of God? Is this the blood that was shed for my salvation over here? What you can imagine why Christians, how they flock to Turin every time there is a public display. I was looking at images of this recently. Do you know, already in the pontificate of Pope St. John Paul II, after some famous testing that some said the Shroud is a fake, and yet the Church never hid it away. The Church continued to allow for pilgrims to flock into the cathedral. When there's a public display, millions of people, the lines, you can see photos of it. They go down the street, around the block, across the bridge. People were in line for some 19 hours just to have a few moments in front of this most prized relic in all of Christendom. Because think about what is a relic usually? Maybe I get a bone of a saint. But this is Jesus, right? This is an instrument of the Passion, the blood that issued from his body. You can imagine why Christians would be compelled to go on pilgrimage, to have just a few brief moments. I was in 2015 with my family in Turin. And nowadays, with the internet, they made it a lot easier. They give you a slot. They say, go between 2 and 2:30, show up outside, and we'll usher you in as a big group. But even still, you're ushered down the aisle. You have a few moments to pause and pray in front of this shroud. But it's over the altar. It's in dim light. It's exposed to never more than 50 lux of light. It's encased in inner argon gas, and only every 6 months does some lucky fellow get to go in there and change the gas and see the shroud. But otherwise, it's encased. It's covered up with a cloth that bears these words. Look, in Latin, it says, "We venerate your shroud, and we contemplate your passion." Can I say that again? Because I think this is what Mother Church is presenting, proposing. How ought we approach? Well, it says, we venerate and we contemplate. We venerate your shroud, and so all the recent pontiffs have, at least since Pope Paul VI, it seems to me, who put it even on TV in the 1970s. And even our most recent Pope, Pope Leo. I live in Italy. It's fun to have an American Pope around. Everybody gives me, oh, Americano, you know? And so he's already said how he wants to see the shroud. He didn't waste any time. In a matter of probably a couple months since his election last May, he already responded with great interest. So, what am I getting at? The shroud, this most venerated relic, I mean, some people call into question the propriety of that term. But it seems to me, if ever there was a relic, if ever there was something to venerate, certainly more than a bone of a saint is the burial cloth of Jesus. And so, what is the evidence that it is? Again, the church, the magisterium, doesn't dogmatize on these things. It's a historical question. The Pope, Pope St. John Paul II, he put it the most clearly that I know. He said, come, all you are scientists, come without bias, and adjudicate for yourselves. You know, you have the autonomy. If you're a historian, if you're a physicist, if you're a chemist, by all means, bring all your expertise to contribute to the overall conversation. The church doesn't see it as within its purview to define outside of faith and morals. But the historical question, that's an open one that anyone can discern. And so the church invites scrutiny, invites the scientific study. In fact, sometimes it pays for it, right? But each one can make up his or her own mind about what it is. I want to start with the scriptures, though, because this is the first eyewitness testimony that we have. And I know it's fresh in our minds because we just proclaimed it on Easter Sunday, but I just want to rehearse this to mention the burial. I'm not sure if you went to Mass or if we went to church. This was commented, the clause, the burial clause that the gospel writer goes on and on about them. It's Jesus' resurrection day, his victory day, and half the passage is about the dirty laundry, which I think is pretty funny. Like, let's revisit this. It's before 6 a.m. It's still dark. Mary Magdalene, the one who's been liberated by Jesus of 7 demons, she becomes a disciple of Jesus, and now she's at the foot of the cross. They fled. She was there to the bitter end. And now, as soon as she can, after the Sabbath, she's up early in the morning. Not early enough, mind you, right? The body is gone. The stone's been rolled away. She peers inside only to see that the body is absent. So she races to tell Peter and John. And they race to the tomb. And you gotta love that John says, I just want you to know, everybody, I won that race. I got there first, right? But it's not just talking smack between the apostles here. There's actually theological richness in the recounting that moves from darkness into light, but with steady gradations. There's a movement, there's a crescendo, and it's perceivable in the verbs of sight. Here's the first one. John, the one who got there first, it says he doesn't go in, but from the top of a stair to see down inside of a cave at the end of it, he crouches, he stoops, and he stoops to look in. It's a little detail, but I love highlighting it because it reminds me that our Gospels are not fiction or fairy tale. They're facts that correspond to the archaeology as we know it on the southern slopes of Jerusalem and in that area where from the Second Temple period, we have tombs in the time of Christ that have just this architecture. A stairwell that goes down into a cave, against the walls, a sill, a table. There the body would lie. Okay, so how do you see inside of a cave if you're standing at the top of a stair? You have no angle in unless you stoop. See that? So stooping, you could see in. And what does he see? He sees the othonia. That's the Greek word that is better translated linen cloths. Burial cloths. They're used in a burial, these linens, this time. So an othonion is the singular. But what we find in the gospel is ta, othonia, that's plural. It's a collective plural, okay? So linen cloths. That's going to be important in a second, but let's keep tracking. Now, Peter, huffing and puffing, catches up with John at last. He goes down those stairs where the stone's been rolled away. Now he can go inside. And inside, he's closer, he can see more. And now we get this descriptive. He sees not only the othonia, the linen cloths, but also the sudarion. So have you heard this? In Greek, it's sudarion. We use the Latin sudarium. You can hear the root word of sudor is sweat, right? So it's sometimes translated a napkin, a handkerchief, a face cloth. Why did they call it a face cloth? Well, John explains it had been on his head. Now, where is it? It's rolled up on the side. It's folded up on the side. It's not with the othonia. It's not with the burial cloth, the linen cloths. What does he get? Do you see that he just went 3 times in the span of 4 phrases? Othonia, othonia, othonia. And that's got to catch our attention. There are 1,000 details of the Passion of Christ I would love to know, but we don't get them. I use this example, the scourging. According to the Gospels, how many people scourged him? What was the instrument of torture like? How many lashes? Did it have lead balls? Did it break the surface of the skin? Did pools of blood gather up? Did Mary swab those up with linens that were then buried with? I don't know. I don't know the answers to any of those questions, because the gospel writer spends half a sentence saying, and having him scourged, he led him off to be crucified. You're like, well, hang on a second, tell me about that. Isn't it interesting that in the mysteries of the Rosary, Mother Church invites us to spend 1/5 of the sorrowful mysteries on the scourging, and it's half a sentence? So don't think importance is necessarily proportionate to the number of words that are spent in it. Okay, so that is true. At the same time, the gospel writer is going on and on about the linens, and you got to ask why. It's Easter Sunday. Do you realize, John, that for the next 2,000 years we're going to be proclaiming this? Like, can you please get this passage right? Why are we dilly-dallying here? What is the issue? Do you pause to think about this? Here's where it really gets good. The one who got there first, John, now goes in after Peter. And he saw and believed. And friends, that is the first distinctively Christian faith anywhere attested in the Bible. At least if you take Paul seriously, when St. Paul would write, if Jesus isn't risen from the dead, my preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. In other words, the whole of Christendom comes crashing down if the resurrection ain't true. And yet, of course, he knows it is. But how does he know? How did anyone know? How did anyone come to believe that Jesus is risen? Testimony. And who's the first silent witness? It's not a who, but a what. These burial cloths are the first to bear witness. And the question is, how do they do it? So on one level, I think it's obvious, right? No tomb raider is going to go in. Oh my gosh, we've got minutes here. There's guards standing outside. Let's see if I can pull this off. I'm going to steal a body. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rush in. I'm going to very carefully take off all the linen cloths, because that's essential, right? And then take the body while leaving the pricey linen cloths behind. No. You would just grab it and go, if that's your mission, right? But something different is what's spied here, but it's more than just that. I know, we use this terminology of they saw the empty tomb. It's true, the body that was supposed to be there isn't, and so in that respect, it's empty. It's emptied of a body. But is the gospel writer going on about its emptiness? Think about it. He just went on and on, not about what's not there, but what is there. It's the contents of the tomb. It's what he sees, when he sees it, the way that he sees it, because he sees it that way, that he saw and believed. Here's where you got to pay special attention to the vocabulary of the evangelist. I said in English 3 times, he saw. John from a distance. Peter going in, he saw. The linen cloth, the Pseudodium too. And then John, he saw and believed. Same verb, right? In English, yes. In the original, no. And there's a reason for that. It's a literary device to speak about an increase in intensity. You know, like those switches that you can not just turn them off and on, but those ones that you can crank up ever so slightly, and then it gets brighter and brighter and brighter. See, from a distance, John sees something, but not much. He sees the linen cloths. When Peter goes in, he can tell you more. Aha, a Pseudodium. But he saw and believed. Do you see how there's sight, and then there's sight? There's what natural organs can perceive. But then there's what supernatural faith can perceive. And this is the light of the new creation. In the first creation, how did it start? Fiat lux, right? Let there be light. So too the light of the new creation starts in the tomb at night. But there's a steady crescendo as we perceive what God has given. Okay, so let's zoom in even further. The only way you can appreciate Sunday morning is if you go back and reread what happened on Friday night. How are the linen cloths there in the first place? Right? Because only the comparison of the two, before and after the resurrection, paints a full picture. So I wonder, does anybody remember who is it that offers his own rock-hewn tomb? Joseph of Arimathea. Yes, I like how you raise your hands. I feel like I'm back in class. Yes. So Joseph of Arimathea, who do we know? What do we know about this man? He's a member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council. He's a rich man, it says quite explicitly, and he buys a clean linen cloth. Friends, you would have to be in the elite upper crust to offer something like this. Go ask Monsignor later how much a linen altar cloth costs even today, right? It's the same. It's extremely pricey textile, especially of this set. Not everybody was crucified and buried like this. I want to set this straight. I know I get this question often. Father Andrew, so many people were crucified. That's true, by the way. Some 6,000 people along the Via Appia, that stretch of road that goes from Rome to, say, Naples. 6,000 people, crucified by the Romans. The Romans didn't invent crucifixion, the Persians did, but they did perfect it, and they did it plenty. So, Jesus is going to be crucified. How do we know he's not one of thousands? Maybe this guy is somebody else. But many have already observed, it's the unique set of sufferings. See, this one, he's not just nails in the hands and in the feet, but also crowned. But also he carries the cross, but he's also speared. We have the wounds of scourging. We have a plucked beard. We have blows to the face. That's just 8 that I just think of off the top of my head. There's probably more. But that is a strong argument, but it's not half of it. Because what's the other half? It's not just the way he's tortured, it's the way he's entombed. Do you think everybody got a burial cloth like a king? Of course not. Not every commoner, and certainly not every crucified man. And so it's the unique combination of all those set of sufferings and then the unique circumstances around his burial. Who else is with Joseph of Arimathea, who's also a member of the Sanhedrin, who purchases 100 Roman pounds of aloes and myrrhs? Good. Nobody raised their hand now. I've got you trained. Shout it out. Nicodemus. Nicodemus, 100 pounds, that's 75 of our pounds. I was trying to give a good visualization of this because I don't know if you buy packs of coffee. Maybe in Costco they come in like 5-pound sacks. But just think of that for a second. Multiply times 15 to get 75 pounds of aloe and myrrh. And this is, look at this, in John 19 and verse 40, when Jesus is buried by these two men, it says very specific language that I think most have missed. It doesn't say they wrapped his body. There is a precise verb for that is used elsewhere. The word that is used is this. They took his body and they bound it with the aromatics according to the custom. There are two things that we got to notice here. Bound? Wait a minute. That means something constraining him. In fact, something like knots. Do you remember when Lazarus is entombed and then Jesus calls, yet here's another Jew who is dead and now laid to rest in a cave after he's wrapped with a sudarium. No, he's not wrapped, he's bound, it says, with linen strips at the hands and at the feet. And when Jesus calls him out, do you remember how he says it? Lazarus, come out. And he does. In his grave clothes, poor guy, like waddling as he can, tied, bound as he is. He's got a sudarium bound around the head. You can't even see. No wonder Jesus would say to the servant standing by, unbind him. Why is that essential information? Because John 19:40 says that Jesus is buried according to the custom. Well, what am I going to do? Pull off of my shelf a book that tells me all about Jewish burial customs? I don't have this book. But I don't need it because it's right there in the very same book of the Bible. John chapter 11 tells of Lazarus. He's another Jew. He's in the tomb for more than 3 days. He's called out of the tomb, but the stone that was there, it's rolled away. Do you see all these parallels between Jesus' resurrection and Lazarus' careful resuscitation? Isn't it true that there are parallels, but it's not just the similarities that are noticeable, it's the glaring dissimilarities, right? Because it's with man's muscle that Jesus commissions them to roll away the stones, to unbind the linen straps. It's by the voice of Jesus, the God-man, that he's empowered to come out of the tomb. In other words, it's not his own intrinsic strength. Lazarus has no power to do that kind of miracle, nor did he call his shot, right? But Jesus did. He'd say, I'll die and on the third day rise. And then he did it. But when he did it, no creature rolled away the stone. No man undid the bindings. Instead, here's what we see. In John chapter 20, the only word, the only descriptor of any kind that modifies the linen cloths, and it appears 3 times, is keimena. In Greek it means lying flat, because it's lying empty. Think of like cloth collapse, if I can give a visual of a balloon that's blown up, but then knotted, right? Bound, you might say. After 2 months, what happens to that air inside the balloon? Doesn't it slowly escape? Such that now the linen envelope, excuse me, not the linen in this case, but the balloon can go down, can lie. Why? Because what was inside no longer is. What I'm suggesting is that what John saw is exactly what he saw on Friday night, except no body. In other words, what else was there to see? Not a singular shroud that's placed there on Friday, that's true. But what was John's word? Othonia, which is plural. You can't have a plural with a singular item. The shroud is a singular sheet. But we know that there were strips at the hands and at the feet that bound the body. So I have a picture there, I think, in the bottom left of the screen, for those who can see. I strained to find an image that satisfies me, but sorry for the analogy, but doesn't it kind of look like, sorry Jesus, the Jesus taco here for a second, right? You've got a long sheet that goes on one plane, and then around the head, and then under. What's missing? The bindings, right? And what else is missing? What else is inside the Othonia? Not the face cloth, careful. John chapter 20 and verse 8. When Peter goes into the tomb, he saw, look, the Othonia, the linen cloths, and the sudarium. So the sudarium is no part of the linen cloths, because they're mentioned together, side by side. So the Othonia must mean the shroud plus at least one other thing. And the one other thing that's described in that same gospel is the linen strips, the keriai, that bind hands and feet. Now, what else did Nicodemus and Joseph? They took 2 things inside. They took the body and they bound it with the aromatics, with the spices, with the aloes and myrrhs. Did that rise from the dead too? Because if not, and it's still there, and it's bound inside, can you imagine how that would get John's attention? He's like, wait a minute, Jesus, I was here. I saw you tucked away on Friday. And now I see it again, in the exact same position and orientation. But there's no body. It's just lying flat. Now, that just adds further evidence. I think that creates more of a picture. But the point is this. It's not that he believes just because he has a stirring of the Spirit, right? It's not just because he blindly, doggedly decides to do so. There's a visible cue. It's the condition of the tomb. Yes, the fact that the body isn't there is an essential ingredient, but there's more. And everything about this scene is suggesting that somebody's up and about. Because look, if it's folded up on the side, who did the folding? If it was on his head, but now it's moved over here, who did the moving? I mean, it's only a cadaver inside of a tomb that's sealed shut. Can you see how there's reasons to believe? This is the essential point. A lot of people will point fingers at you, Christians, and say, you Christians, you have no evidence for your belief, but you just shut your eyes and you give yourself a lobotomy, maybe, I don't know, and then you become a believer. No. Jesus would say this in John chapter 10. Do you remember where he goes on about the work of his Father? Believe me, he says, or else believe because of the works that I do. And what's the work par excellence, if not the resurrection? Didn't he say that? Remember when he says to this generation is demanding for signs. He said, you're not going to get a sign except for the sign of Jonah. Just as he was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a fish, well, so too the Son of Man 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So Jesus understands his resurrection not just as any work, but as the work of works, the sign of signs, that which validates his ministry and his claims. And so, by the way, I just got a question. I was presenting in Harvard and like a week ago, and I got some very challenging questions and really good ones. And somebody asked me about this 3 days and 3 nights. Because, look, Jesus, you died on Friday night. Hold on a second. You rose on Sunday morning. You didn't add that up right, Jesus. Hold on. Well, what if we just take Jesus at his word for a second and count backwards? Where would that land us? Do you ever think about that? It's Sunday morning when he's risen, sure. But if you bounce back 3 days and 3 nights, it lands you in Thursday evening, when Jesus is at the Last Supper. And at the Last Supper, he says, take, this is my body. Take, this is my blood. By the way, what happens when you separate blood from body? You die, right? Because Leviticus 17:11, life is in the blood. Right, so Jesus is speaking in these terms. This is my body which will be offered. This is my blood which will be poured out. At table, he's giving us the interpretive lens by which to read that which now is about to play out in the flesh. So do you see how Jesus is calling his shot? Jesus knows what's going to happen. But he's also entering into death on Thursday night. And we don't have to guess at that. He tells us. Because from the Last Supper on Mount Zion, he goes down to the Kidron Valley and up the other side, the Mount of Olives, to his habitual place of prayer, the Garden of Gethsemane. Do you remember how he introduces this? To his friends, Peter, James, and John. My soul is sorrowful unto death. Do you see that? It's his soul that is entering into death on Thursday night. And as he prays, his blood vessels explode. Right? This is what the gospel will tell us from the testimonies from a doctor. Luke is a doctor. And he says this, being in agony, he prayed more fervently, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. Friends, when I pray, that doesn't happen, right? But this is what Jesus is saying amen to. He's going to take on the sins of the world, just as he said he would. And to the last consequence, he'll drink to the dregs this bitter cup, going all the way down. But you know that the descent begins with giving assent to the will of God, out of love, in trust. The opposite of the first Adam, who failed to trust, who disobeyed. Okay, so we're going to go there, but I want you to see, hopefully, from the start, that it's the gospel writers who put this as a centerpiece, not just of the passion narrative. It's part, absolutely. The burial is in that space, Holy Saturday. But it's the centerpiece of the resurrection narrative. It's the first baby step towards faith in the resurrection. By the way, that faith will be shored up in the appearances of Jesus. We just read this. Is that today or yesterday? We saw it. I'm so confused. I'm jet lagged a little. That was today, right? No. Luke 24 was today. Yesterday was John 20, 11 to 18, right? Where Mary Magdalene, she's still in the garden. And now she's weeping. I love it. The men, they see the tomb, and they're like, okay, we've seen what's needs to be, they're out of there. Meanwhile, Mary sits in sadness, weeping, until she sees the gardener, or so she thinks. But when he passes by, and she says, if you've taken him, tell me where you've laid him, and I'll carry him away myself. It's the folly of love here. But, of course, when he says her name, Mary, she recognizes that voice. She knows it's Jesus and says, Rabboni. This is very sweet, right? They embrace, but he says, don't cling to me, because I've not yet ascended to my Father and to your Father. And so, this is a confirmation. This is now an added testimony. But you see the itinerary of this passage that started in darkness, moves through verbs of sight, reason, faith. He saw and believed. It's like, is that the terminus? A passage from what natural eyes can see to what supernatural faith can perceive? That would be good, but there's one step better. When Mary embraces the living, glorified, divinized humanity of Jesus. It's a Holy Communion that is pictured. Reason, faith, Holy Communion. That's the itinerary from the darkness into the zenith of the new creation, right? It's our itinerary too, by the way. We're allowed to look. We're allowed to scrutinize. Hopefully, we can move from the darkness into understanding, into faith. But the finish line, friends, is a Holy Communion with a Lord who lives. So I hope we can retrace that same itinerary today. I want to segue, though. That was the introduction for those of us who are pilgrims. And I think that is the focus of this family of faith, right? But I want to segue to the secular space. Let's put down the Bible for a second. Let's pick up the lab coat instead and look with the eyes of a scientist at this most scientifically studied archaeological artifact in the history of the world. When did Shroud science begin? I don't think there's a question about that. It's the day it was photographed by this gentleman in the slide. Secondo Pia brings this monstrosity of a machine. It's like the size of a refrigerator. You can visit it in Turin to this day. But can you imagine if you're the royal family, the Savoy family owns the Shroud in this year, 1898, and as a party favor, you'd bring out the burial shroud of Jesus for a baptism, for a wedding. Can you imagine? Secondo Pia is there to snap a photo. Snap. It takes 15 minutes for the event to occur. Because it's got to impress itself on a plate, a glass plate, that you now carry out of the camera and into a camera oscura, a dark room. No windows, no light whatsoever. And then in an emulsion, you get to see, not this is what we call the positive image. But he's going to see, for the first time, let's see how it appears in this particular slide. No, I think I lost my zapper. I got to point this way maybe? There we go. Oh, it's waking up. Okay. If somebody's in the back, just hit the advanced slide, 1. But look, I don't have to do it because we got it before our eyes right here. He sees this. For the first time in human history, no one had ever seen that. Think of this. For 18 centuries, we're venerating already this cloth. And yet nobody knew that the photo negative is no negative at all. Why? Because this is the image that pops off the page. This image is not faint, ghostly, as this one is, right? But here, I can barely, if I squint, I can maybe make out the notion of 2 eyes, a nose, a mustache, and a mouth. But let's be honest, it's not obvious that it's anatomically perfect. The example I always give is that of the eyeballs, right? Because on the Shroud, what you can see, and I really would love some help back there advancing one slide, because my clicker ain't working anymore. Oh, what a shame. So the eyeballs here are hard to discern. For example, if you imagine the outlines as these whiter, brighter portions, it might look like a Bart Simpson Jesus. In other words, big bug eyes, larger than life, not true to form. But that's an interpretation that we bring to the table. It's not what's there. Because what's there is seen better as a photo negative. Those aren't the outlines around open eyeballs. These are the subtle contours of the sockets surrounding the eyes. Do you know what picks up on this? The anatomical perfection of the body, both with regard to its morphology and its pathologies. So it's the shape of his body, yes, but it's also the unique sufferings. Things like blood flows, blood clots, with such anatomical precision that even an agnostic or atheist in Paris by the name of Yves Delage is going to write a paper, the conclusion of which is the man of the Shroud is Jesus of Nazareth. In that, do you know who says he doesn't want to publish the minutes? His own colleague in the Académie des Sciences, who is also atheist. I think this is kind of humorous, that you have these two atheists going back and forth. Are we allowed to talk about Jesus in the Academy? And one says yes, and one says no. And the one who says yes, Yves Delage, says, I don't understand why people are scandalized. If we're talking about Xerxes, some Persian king, some Egyptian pharaoh, no one would have anything to say if there's a material trace of his existence. But why is Jesus in some special category? I don't get it. That's what the atheists were saying. Thank you. So, are we just going to do it by the signal? Go ahead. I need like a word. Oh, are you zapping for me from over there? All right. Can I use it or no? It's not working. Okay. Why don't we just do it from the keyboard? And when I snap, is that a way to do it? Can we just do? I've never had this happen to me before. Do I dance? I need a code word. All right. Well, I'm going to press on, but you just advance when you get the capacity to do so. All right. There we go. Shut it down. All right. We'll roll with it. We'll roll with it. So, Yves Delage notices this. Anatomical perfection. There are no other grave cloths that bear the image of a man with anatomical perfection and as a photo negative. It's simply one of a kind just on those two criteria alone. But friends, we're not in 1900 anymore. Like, we have more sophisticated tools. So what would happen if we were to examine it today? Well, let's just fast forward to 1976. That's when Eric Jumper and Dr. John Jackson at the United States Air Force Academy are going to examine the Shroud with a tool called the VP8 Image Analyzer. There was just a few weeks ago in Orange County. Pete Schumacher, the inventor of this, was giving a talk. This is now 50 years later. Think exactly 50 years later. But think of this. This was a mind-boggling discovery. They visualized something unique for the first time. These physicists in Colorado. Sticking an image of the face under the VP8 renders three-dimensional information. In other words, we can rotate around the X, Y, and Z axes a brightness map that is based upon the density of coloration on the cloth, and it corresponds to a human form, unlike any other photograph that we have in the world. This takes some explanation. I'll try my best. Imagine a body that's lying on a table, and then we drape a sheet over it. Isn't it going to touch the tip of the nose because the nose sticks out? Right, so the result of that is it's most densely colorized here, where there's contact. Where there's a proportion between the distance from the body to the cloth, and the density of coloration. See, I don't know if you can notice this, but the shroud is just, the image on it is just one hue. It's what we call monochromatic. Imagine like if you have a white sheet of paper, and I say, okay, we're going to do a drawing, but you only get one magic marker. And here's the orange, right? A caramel, sepia tone. If you want to give the impression of a darker areas, you put more dots in less space. You're not allowed brush strokes. There are no brush strokes on the shroud. But if you want to give the impression of lighter areas, what would you just spread out the dots, right? That's what we got going on in the shroud. The shroud is all one hue, but there's a relationship between the density of color and the distance from the body to the cloth. Bottom line is that this flat tablecloth, basically think of that, it's paper thin. It encodes 3D information. We can reconstruct a statue. If you go to Jerusalem, if you go to Rome, if you go to Krakow, if you go to Orange County, if you go to Texas, you will find a statue that is based on mathematical data in a centuries-old cloth. And it corresponds to an anatomically perfect human body with regard to its morphology and its pathology. Oh, and this body projected an image that is a photo negative and encodes 3D information. This is how unique this image is. I say it, what I did is just rattled off a few what I like to call minimal facts. I want to define this term precisely. Look, there are people who believe the shroud is authentic, and there are people who believe it's not. But they agree on the data. They agree on minimal facts. The fact that there's an image, that's not disputable. The fact that there's bloodstains, that's seen by all. The fact that it's a human body, people admit this much. Okay? The photonegativity, the three-dimensional qualities. You have to sum these up. You have to accumulate these data points like a detective. Right? When the detective goes to the crime scene, he can't just say, I found one footprint, let's go home. No, he's like, here's a footprint, here's a blood stain, here's a smoking gun, right? And now he infers what took place on the basis of all the evidence. Do you see how that's what a responsible person does? You harmonize everything you know into one coherent picture. What you don't do is pick your favorite pet theory and then cling to the one piece of evidence that supports it, right? Instead, you have to be docile to what's there, the minimal facts. Well, let's fast forward. Do we lose our screen? We're going to give up on the screen. Okay, that's okay. We can do this. Yeah, is it there? Okay, is it back? Oh, it's coming back. Not a problem. We got this. So after the three-dimensionality is seen, this is what the highest powered laboratories in America, 20 of them, come together and now petition the royal family in Italy to say, can we have 5 days to do a battery of exams on this object directly? Everything we'll do will be non-invasive, non-destructive, but we want to answer one question. It's not a religious question. The question is, how did the image get there? Do you see how that's, you can be a Catholic, a Protestant, a Jew, an atheist, and the question's the same. Like, what's there? How did it get there? Is it a painting? Is it a rubbing? Is it a rubbing? Do you know, like, when you're in kindergarten, you put a leaf under a sheet of paper, and then with the crayons, scratch back and forth? Maybe that is a clever idea. Let's go see. But wait, maybe it's a hot statue that they just draped the cloth over, and then, it left a mark from a bird. It's a good idea. Let's go see. Maybe it's a photo. It's an ancient form of photography. These are the ideas. That's what was on the table. All right. So, go ahead and advance 3 slides for me. Let me see if we can catch up. No. All right. You tell me when it's moving. I'll try to position myself. Okay. So they go overseas with a question. They go overseas with 80 crates of the most state-of-the-art equipment known to man. They prepared for this test for over a year. They built a stainless steel frame with magnets. They went to 3M and developed special forms of adhesive that would allow for sticky tape samples that wouldn't alter, destroy, or leave residue on the cloth. I mean, the level of professionalism here is mind-boggling. And it's every sector of science. It's physics, it's chemistry, it's biology, it's X-ray, it's infrared. You're looking at the VP8 image analyzer that saw for the first time the three-dimensionality. Go one slide forward for me, because this is a picture of the team after a year almost created international fiasco when they can't get through customs with all of the state-of-the-art equipment. But they do get there with the intercession of a priest who vouches for them, and they get there 5 days. They get there 120 consecutive hours. Amongst the team, one more slide for me. Barry Schwartz, the technical photographer. This was my friend on the far right, the man with the beard, some 50 years ago, mind you. He just passed away, sadly, about 2 years ago, now less than that. But he went skeptical and remained skeptical for years. But do you know what was the element that really put him over the edge? The blood. See, when this team went overseas, they said, that blood, you can barely see it, to be honest, on this particular printing, but this blood looks too red. Because you know what happens to blood over time, right? It turns brown or black, as the oxygen in the air requires. But here, it stayed red. And so some imagined that it was paint. And in fact, they do a test. One of these tests is called pyrolysis mass spectroscopy. See, if this was a painting, and in a clever way we vacuumed out every particle of paint, but by accident 1 out of 1,000,000 particles stayed behind, pyrolysis mass spectroscopy would not only find it, but it would identify its chemical composition. This is iron oxide. This is magnesium nitrate. Now I'm just making things up. The point is, they would tell you what kind of pigment, but there's no pigment. Organic or inorganic, there's no varnish, there's no dye, there's no ink, there's no directionality, there's no brush strokes, there's no highlights, there's no shadows. In fact, the color on the cloth doesn't even penetrate to the medulla of an individual thread, but sits on the tippity top, the surface of the fibers. It penetrates 0.2 microns. Friends, that is 1/5 of 1,000th of a millimeter. And so, what made that? What is that? We can look at the microscope and see that it's the carbohydrate chains that compose the cellulose. You know, the flax is the plant from which we derive linen. But those carbohydrate chains are dehydrated or oxidized. But the question is, by what cause? We can see that is there. What we can't say is how it happened, even to this day. These scientists, they conclude this at the end of all their studies. These markings are the markings of a man. This blood is human blood. The proteins, the serum albumin, the hemoglobin, the bilirubin allows us to say as much. But the formation of the image, we can say this for now. It's not the product of human artwork. Do you see how they phrase this? They don't tell you what it is, they tell you what it's not. And even to this day, we have no explanation for how this image got there. What we can do is disprove all the theories that were put forth. We know it's not a painting. We know it's not a rubbing. We know it's not a scorch or a photograph. What we can't tell you is how it got there, by what means or mechanism it was made. And so this is where I gotta quote Sherlock Holmes, right? Because he's got the right idea when he puts it like this. Once you've eliminated all that's impossible, whatever remains, however improbable it might seem, most certainly true. And so what is the alternative? What is the independent historical witness that's been passed down and proclaimed in the communities of faith? Well, that it wasn't a natural means. Maybe it's not the natural effects of a natural cause. Maybe it's the natural effect of a supernatural event. Maybe it's the results of the resurrection. And if that's the case, what we're looking at isn't just a death cloth, but a resurrection cloth. Look, it's Easter Wednesday. It is absolutely appropriate to look at the Shroud of Turin. I want to highlight something. I'm wearing this around my wrist right now, but I don't know if you can see it from there, but this little medallion, it comes from Maria Pierina de Micheli had a visions of Jesus, and he asked her to have this medal minted. Pope Benedict XVI, I think it's 2010-ish, beatifies her. And this is part of a long tradition of devotion to the holy face. I know you can't see it, but it's the face of Jesus. It's the holy face. And yet it's the image of the man of the shroud. That is the image that is used. And around the rim, it has these words. It's from a psalm. May the light of your face shine on us. You see, it's a shiny face, a luminous, glorious image that is mentioned. What's on the other side, you think, of the coin? I know you can't see this, but I'll have a slide here later. It's the image of the Eucharist. It's today's gospel. Around the rim, Mane nobiscum Domine. The apostles, the disciples on the road to Emmaus, the ones who can't see him, they don't notice him, they're fleeing from God's will, from God's city, until Jesus comes and has a long Bible study with them. They don't know it's Jesus. But their hearts are burning as he opens the scripture to them. But when he gestures as if he's marching on long further, they beg him now, stay with us. Mane nobiscum Domine. And he takes bread and blesses and breaks and gives. And their eyes are opened in the fractio panis, the breaking of the bread. On the other side of the coin is the Eucharistic Jesus, and the rays of light emanate out. Because the prayer was answered. He does remain with us. As he promised, I am with you always to the... Am I out of time already? Oh my gosh. It is 7 o'clock. I better march to go for... hold on a second. I've got a half an hour to wrap this up. We got this. All right. So my point is this, that the one who died is the one who rose, is the one who remains in the Eucharist. That's good news, my friends, because he hasn't just ascended to go up and away, as it's sometimes said, right? But in the Eucharist, he's remained. Remember what Jesus said to Mary Magdalene? Don't cling to me, because I've not yet ascended to my Father. And why? Is Jesus saying, stiff-arm Jesus, right? Stay away. Cooties, Mary. Stop. No, he embraces her, obviously, but he's saying the mode of my presence, the intimacy that we'll share, will be deeper now. It's good that I go, because I'll send the Spirit. I'll come in the most intimate way. But when you brush your teeth, when you're headed to the pillow, he's there. You can talk to him. He can know you in your sufferings, in your sorrow, because he's God. And he's descended all the way down into the deepest darkness, but then bounced back to show himself victorious. And so can we be, provided we remain in him, right? Okay, so this is where I want to go next, about this team that discovers the Shroud and all its special qualities. They know more information than I can possibly download in the next 30 minutes. But do you know that you can sign up at a pontifical university in Rome for a postgraduate certificate that lasts a year? And I'm supposed to do this in 30 minutes? Impossible, right? So I can only give you the highlights here, but some things you just got to know. Some basics about this Shroud. Let's go. Oh, all right. Advance one slide. Look, the dimensions are easy to capture because you have a one-to-one replica. This is often... Look, It's the front of the body that you see here. It's the back of the body that you see here. So you see how it's double the height of a human body? Because it wrapped around him in such a way that we see not only the frontal image, but also the dorsal image. You see these blood stains. Look at the zoomed in image on the slide. In the nooks and crannies, we have not a painting of blood, not a negative of blood, but a real clot. We can see the serum halos even around bloodstains in certain areas. This is most certainly the effect of an outflow from a human body. Okay, it's also, by the way, a ticking clock, right? Because we know how long it takes for coagulated blood by process of fibrinolysis to soften in the tomb and then transfer into the fibers. And it tells us something of the timeline. How long was that body in contact with the cloth? The answer, by the way, is at least 24 hours. More precisely, seems 30 to 36 hours, given the blood stains. Okay? So, please press on if you can. I'll try. But it's above all 4 types of marks that I can point out. I should see these long white lines. This is what results from a fire in 1532. And this, you see these diamond shapes? Careful, this is one that throws, this is the result of the shroud being folded and placed in a puddle for who knows how long. But look, this is another one. And see the symmetry on either side? Because it was folded up in this way, and it leaves these diamond shapes everywhere. What happens to a painting when you put it in water? When you set it on fire? Is it not diluted, damaged, destroyed in some way? And yet the body image is unfazed. It's not washed out. It's not just damaged or destroyed. That led scientists to consider the possibility that what caused the image is some sort of radiant energy. Anea Laboratories in Rome, headed by Paolo Di Lazzaro, a personal friend and a teacher at our Pontifical University, he spent 5 years sending light at linen. This is how committed he was to his cause. He obtained seeds from the time of Jesus, grew flax, then made the same type of twist and the same type of weave so that it would be as similar structurally, chemically, so that when he sent light its way, it might receive a trace. But he's so frustrated because he was either carbonizing altogether or getting no effect at all. And it was only after 5 years using vacuum ultraviolet excimer lasers with a pulsation that lasts but 1/40 billionth of a second. That's 25 nanoseconds. Okay? This flash of light leaves a sepia tone on the surface of the fibers that allows him to calculate the total amount of radiant energy, given the total surface area of the body. This calculation, it's a matter of peer-reviewed science. It's not a religious article. Anyone can read it. The amount of radiant energy required is 34,000 billion watts. So think of this. What body emanates light of any kind, let alone 34,000 billion watts of it? You have to understand that watts is joules per second, right? So it's not just the numerator, but it's the denominator, right? Because if we unleash this kind of power for any length of time, we're going to incinerate the cloth and, oh, by the way, leave a crater the size of Hiroshima or Nagasaki in Jerusalem. And that we don't find. Why? Because it's 25 nanoseconds. A 40 billionth of a second. In other words, it's not created by heat. It's a cold, quick burst of radiant energy. That's the closest approximation that we can postulate for the creational event, right, for this image. This is why we have a strong argument for resurrection. I just got to make a link back to the scriptures, because can you think of a moment when light emanated out from the face of Jesus? The transfiguration. Did you ever notice this? It's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It says, his face shone like the sun, Matthew 17. But what's the next verse? And his clothes became white as light. Do you see how it's a two-step? Like, first it's his body that emanates light. But then, the effect, the upshot of that, is that a luminous trace is recorded on the clothes in communion with that body. But wait a minute, the transfiguration is but a prefiguration of the resurrection, right? What's he talking with Moses and Elijah about? By the way, Moses and Elijah, the only two in the Old Testament who, on a mountain, saw God's glory. It's a theophany. It's a manifestation of the deity, of the divinity of God for Moses, for Elijah, for Jesus. But Jesus is the source. Moses has to veil himself as a creature. That's how much he receives from that font, right? But look, all that is just, they're conversing about his exodus, right? The new exodus, his departure, his passing, exactly. They're pointing forward to the Paschal mystery. If the transfiguration is but a pointing finger to the resurrection, does it not stand to reason that in the resurrection his body would shine and the clothes he wears would too? Okay, so track with me. There's a saint that goes like this. He puts it almost perfectly when he says, the cross received Christ alive and handed him over dead. The shroud received him dead and handed him over alive. I love that he sees that anti-parallel movement. Dying, you destroyed our death. Rising, you restored our life. So we need to hold together the dying and the rising, the cross and the shroud. But can we just track one baby step further? Look, where did that shroud go? If not around his body and now laid on a slab of stone. If you visit that stone today, you know where it'll be. In a church. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Right, when you go see that sepulchre, what is that stone slab if not a table? An altar that's robed in a white cloth. But it's not closed up on a dead body. The cloth now is unfurled. And what comes from that table? If not bread from heaven. And so we remember the beginning of this Jesus story. Baby Jesus was born in Bethlehem, house of bread. He's wrapped in swaddling clothes. Does that rhyme with something else? Maybe at the end when he's wrapped again? Where's he laid but in a manger, a feeding trough? Because he's the food. And so it is at the end of the story. At the entryway into this passion, he takes bread and gives it, saying, this is my body. Do you see how it all holds together? Do you see how Jesus shows a plan of God from the start to the finish? This is what none of us can do. Call our shot in this way. Like when I play pool, I like to just whack it really hard because then something magically drops eventually. Maybe. But when you're good, you say like, okay, it's going to go off this side and then off that pot and then off that ball and into the side pocket. Jesus would call his shot. Jesus would be prophesied hundreds of years before Bethlehem. That's in Micah. The book of Micah said that he'd be born there. So this is the kind of thing that can reveal God's plan. All right, let's press on. Who knows what slides next? I don't know. So let's see if I can pick up this story where we left it off. All right, let's go into some of the basics about this shroud. Oh, now it's dimensions. All right, we'll say a word about the dimensions. Look, this is important because it's 14 foot 3 by 3 foot 7, or in meters 4.4 by 1.1. But in the ancient unit of measure, that was the international standard at the time of Christ, it's perfect whole numbers. It's 2 by 8 Syrian cubits, right? And it points to its antiquity. But because, I don't go to Home Depot and ask the guy for lumber in the size of 1.1 by 4.4, right? He looks at me funny and says, dude, we've got 2 by 4s and we've got 4 by 4s, but 1.1, that's not a thing, right? So the units of measure point to its antiquity, but beyond that, they point to the cost of this cloth. This is minutia we often move past because there's so many fascinating details in the shroud. But think of this. The cloth shows a man that's tortured, crowned, nailed, speared, and yet buried as a king? Who in the world is doing this? And yet it's rare in his circumstances, not just in torture, but also in burial. And yet that's exactly what the eyewitness accounts give us in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This is crazy. Look, in the birth narrative, we don't have 4 witnesses. It's only in Luke and in Matthew that we get the infancy narratives. But when it comes to the burial cloths, all 4 Gospels mention them. And that's got to be important. All right, let's press on. Okay, so please advance. But I want to go into the sufferings of Christ. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Still keep going. One more. There we go. All right, I want to talk about this. Jesus' agony. Let's back up from Sunday morning to Thursday night. This is where it begins, and it'll surprise you. This is where he gives us the key to understanding everything that follows. And we'll run out of time, but at least you'll have the key to keep going on your own, right? This is the point, that his body is but an outward sign of an invisible reality. Watch, because as he prays, my soul is sorrowful unto death. As he prays, let this cup pass from me, his blood vessels explode. Here's how a peer-reviewed scientific journal article on the phenomenon called hematidrosis or hematihydrosis. This is under your subcutaneous layer of skin. The smallest of blood vessels, the ones between the arteries and the veins, these capillaries become distended and now burst, and the hemorrhage is able to exit out through the adjacent sweat pores. And now on the surface of the skin, which is the biggest organ in your body, beads of blood will appear, leaving this largest of organs now sensitive to touch. So just to blow air over the surface of the skin, that would register as physical pain for the victim of hematidrosis. I didn't know that until I studied the Shroud. But and for easily a year and a half, I failed to note the starting point of the physical violence that men did to Jesus. It wasn't a spear in his side. It wasn't a scourge on his back. It wasn't a crown on his head. All of that is Friday. But on Thursday night, in the company of his friends, he prays. And as he prays, his blood vessels explode, sensitizing his skin. The first violence after this moment is the kiss of Judas. Think of that. The kiss that ought to have been a sign of love and loyalty is turned upside down. Because the soldiers that would nab Jesus, they're not fans or followers of him. So how do they know? Because they're cued by one of the inner circle. Judas would come with a big smile and say, "Hail, Rabbi." But what he's really doing with this gesture is saying, "I hope you die." Because that's the first domino to fall. That's what unleashes a chain reaction that climaxes in crucifixion. No wonder Jesus would say to Pontius Pilate, "He who handed me over to you has the greater sin." It hurts the heart of Christ more because it's one of his privileged few who hand him over. And so he says, "Friend, to betray me with a kiss?" Can't you hear the pain behind that question? And so it's appropriate that it register in his body as physical pain, because the inward reality is that this is violent. This is a betrayal. It hurts in more ways than one. And so, what do we understand? That the body is but a sacrament, an outward sign of a spiritual reality. Okay, and that spiritual reality is that he's taking on the sins of the world. I wish we had time to enter into the biblical motif of the bitter cup by which, drunk to the dregs, we atone for the sins of the world. Ever so quickly, I'll just allude to Exodus 32 and the golden calf, that after this idolatry, Moses leaves for 5 minutes to go up the mountain. Aaron's down turning earrings into a god made of gold, right? And so what does Moses say? Grind that down into dust to atone. The first time the word atone appears in the Bible is this. What does he propose they do with this unholy dust? Drink it. Like, what would you do? I'd run too. That's what they like, no sir, I'm getting out of here. And so, isn't it interesting that Jesus alludes to a bitter cup that he's to drink to the dregs? Do you see, you see the subtle hint at the atonement? How does he make us at one? Do you know that atone is one of those few words that actually has an English etymology? There's hardly any. But how do I expiate? How do I atone? Once I've been alienated, been distanced, been exiled out of Eden, how do I get back to that place of communion with God? Somebody's got to drink a bitter cup. Jesus would say it, right? Remember the two brothers who send their mom, by the way, to sit one at the right and one at the left? They can't ask for themselves. That takes too much chutzpah, right? But mom will do it for them. I want him to sit one at the right. Can you drink the cup that I'll drink? Can you be baptized with the baptism with which I'll be baptized? Jesus is referring to his own death. And so it is that on the cross, he is drinking a bitter cup that atones for the sins of the world. Oh, there's so much more if you turn not only to look with the eyes of a scientist, but look to the scriptures to unpack what these things mean. Let's go forward, though. Advance a slide. Let's see. After Jesus, keep going. Of course, it's the scourging that follows after. This is brutal, and it's far more than what you imagined if you watch TV or if you just read the scriptures, because they just don't tell you. I imagined that he scourged on the back. From the time I was a kid, those are the pictures that I saw. It's not the case. On the shroud, advance one slide. It is some 372 of these dumbbell shapes. You have to double that if you think in terms of individual balls. But they appear not just in pairs, like a dumbbell, but in triads. In other words, it seems that one handle has 3 leather straps, elastic as they are with the leather that they're made of, and the blow that they deliver is equivalent to a 3rd-degree burn as far as the damage that it does to the body. And so this is on the front and the back, from the clavicle to the ankle. And it's every surface of the skin. It's in the pelvic region, it's in the buttocks, and the wounds are just as deep there as everywhere else in the body. And so we know there's no protective loincloth in the moment of scourging. He's utterly naked. We're literally stripping him of his dignity. Here's where we need to see more than what natural eyes can perceive. Jesus is the new Adam. The first Adam was naked without shame in Genesis 2:24, right in the original garden paradise. When does shame of nakedness enter in? With the original sin, right? With the disobedience of Adam. And so he covers himself with fig leaves until God gives him real leather clothes, restoring his dignity after he forfeited it. But the new Adam is naked. But when stripped, the irony is He's entering into the knot that Adam and Eve tied with their disobedience. He's taking upon himself the consequences of their choice. And he's not redeeming us. He's not forgiving us by snapping a finger, by waving a wand. It's not abracadabra, right? He takes very seriously the consequences of sin. He does take away the sins of the world, but he does it like this, by taking upon himself the sins of the world. And that's what we read on Good Friday, Isaiah 53, written some 700 years, mind you, before Jesus walked the earth. It says this, by his stripes we were healed. Upon him, the chastisement that makes us whole. Jesus is paying a debt that he doesn't owe because we owe a debt that we can't pay. Please advance a slide. I want you to see that we see these scourge marks up and down the body right there. We see them with such detail that we can even know the directionality at which the lashes land. See, when it lands towards the mid-body range, it does so at an angle that's perpendicular to the main axis of the body. But where it strikes towards the head or feet, it does so at an oblique angle always. Except, there's two men scourging from two unique pivot points. They stand still, but they have a radius. And they're each giving lashes from one point that it emanates out. Except one man's radius is longer than the other, because evidently one man is taller than the other. These are the details that make the theory of this being the work of a con artist strain credulity. Because nobody noticed these things until the modern era. But now that we zoom in and see the way the lashes land, we see, oh my gosh, there is some method to the madness. This is discernible, this is reasonable, it's intelligible. But nobody thought to look until now. All right, let's press on. I want to get to the crown of thorns, and with this, then I'll take your questions. Keep going. Yeah, one more. Look at this. This is the way we've often imagined the crown. It's a wreath, it's a ring. The top of the head is exposed to the open air. But this is our tradition. It's not what we see on the shroud. See, a con artist would cater to our expectations. He's trying to convince us all that this is the real McCoy, will give us what we want to see. And yet he doesn't. He dares to deviate from that which is enshrined in our tradition everywhere, and instead present, please advance, what we'll see on the shroud is a cap. One more. It's a cap that looks like there's a reconstruction. See how it's almost like a helmet? See how it's gathered together with a pliant branch or wicker at its base? This takes a matter of minutes to construct. Just lop off a mess of thorns, bind it together, and then with a sword or spear, press it on the head. Is the centurion going to take 3.5 hours to make a beautiful braid, just so it can stand as lovely as what we see in our churches? Isn't it obvious that he would do it? He would just get the job done in a way that's simple. But what we see on the shroud is that the whole back of the head shows some 30 to 50 puncture wounds. We see these flows of blood, and the blood flows down and towards the center, as gravity would require, but it's pooling especially at the nape of the neck. So this is complex with regard to the blood flows, especially if you look to the brow. Advance one slide for me. I want to show you what's here at the forehead. You can see it pretty well here. Let's see if my laser. Can you see what looks like a 3? And then there's like a teardrop shape. That is from the frontal vein. That's venous blood. But this, towards the temple area, is arterial blood. Of course, in the modern era, we can distinguish this. In the 1200s, they didn't know the subtleties of the circulatory system and how the musculature around the one is different from that of the other. Arteries and the veins are not the same. But it's with perfection that we see these blood flows. But it's beyond that. I mean, because if all I look to the crown with the eyes of a scientist to say, like, this really hurt. This was a suffering. If I can reconstruct the shape of the crown, if I could tell you those are 3/4 of an inch long, that they press not just through the flesh, but to the bony plate below, that's descriptive. That's helpful for the imagination, I guess. But where's the spiritual or theological meaning of it? Because when I was a kid, I didn't know the answer to that. I remember being Oceanside elementary school with Miss Resnick drawing a picture of Jesus in the crown of thorns. I'm sure my spirituality went something like this. Ouch, right? Like, that's about all a 7-year-old can do, right? But when you're older, you gotta ask deeper questions. Why is it significant that Jesus didn't suffer, I don't know, a paper cut or something slight? He's the Son of God. Everything he does has infinite value. Why does he have to do this? Why this unique way of suffering? Look at this. The crown is not just a crown, it's a crown of thorns. And the first time the word thorns appears in the Bible is in Genesis. But they debut after the original sin. Did you think of that? Like, there's trees that have fruit prior to the fall. But it's after the fall that Yahweh, the Lord God, says to Adam, because you've listened to your wife and eaten of the fruit of which I said, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed be the ground because of you. I wish I could memorize that verse from Joy to the World. But you know the third stanza? It goes something like this. No more shall sin and sorrow grow, nor thorn infest the ground. I'm not singing very well. Thorn infest the ground. What's the curse? Thorns and thistles shall it bear forth. Adam, there's a cosmic curse over all the land, and it takes this shape. Thorns and thistles. Jesus knew his Bible. Jesus knew that thorns were a symbol of sin. Jesus, in his first sermon, uses the exact same vocabulary when he says, beware false prophets. They are ravenous wolves in sheep's clothing. But guys, don't worry about it, because you'll know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? That's how we know Jesus was super interested in agriculture, right? Like, that's what's going on. No. What are the thorns and the thistles, if not the evil, the rotten fruit we're not meant for? But instead, the figs and grapes are the faith, hope, and love, the acts that flow fruitfully from God through us. And so, Jesus knew that we're made for moral goodness, but not for moral evil. He knew that moral evil was symbolized by thorns and thistles, just as he knew that he'd be crowned with them. And so without opening his mouth, but by wearing a crown of thorns, Jesus is gesturing in this direction. I'm the sin bearer. I bear the sins of the world on my head. This too is an expression in the Bible. You've heard it like this. What goes around comes around. And when it comes around, it comes upon the head. It's a biblical motif. It's in the Psalms, it's in Esther, it's in Judith, I believe. But this, what goes around, comes around. It comes upon the head. Does that remind you of a Jewish feast? The one that does away with sins? What is the Day of Atonement, if not Yom Kippur, the day of the covering, the day of expiation? How do you expiate? I have no idea how to take away sins, but here's what the priest would do. He would take his hands and lay them on the head of a vicarious victim, an animal, a scapegoat, who would then be exiled out of the camp, right? Into the wilderness, to die. Does that ring a bell? I mean, Jesus, a vicarious victim who takes upon himself the sins of the world. It's John the Baptist. On page 1 of John's Gospel, who points out Jesus in this way. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Now fast forward. It's Calvary. It's Good Friday. Jesus is on the cross and crowned. And they're saying, look, you saved others. Save yourself. Come down and we'll believe in you. Good deal, Jesus. Don't you want our belief? Do it. You saved up. You showed power before. Show it again, and we'll believe in you. Jesus, I think what he's saying is this. You want to see power? Okay. I'll die and on the third day rise, just as I said I would. But for the time being, my horns are wrapped in a thicket. Can you hear my language here? Isn't it Genesis 22, where Abraham went up a mountain and promised his only beloved son? God will provide a lamb, but he doesn't, because when the angel stays the hand of Abraham before he offers his son as a whole burnt offering, he spins around and sees a ram with its horns wrapped in a thicket. Horns is the language of power, of might. In other words, his might is constrained. He can't defend himself. He's offered up. Jesus is going to say to the enemies gathered round, you want to take your best shot? Go ahead. I won't dodge the bullet. I'll go all the way down into the domain of death. But then, when light shines out of the darkness, the light of the new creation is on display. And it's as if he's showing up to say, that's it. That's all you got. Do you see how Jesus isn't just a little bit stronger than Satan? He's not like duking it out in the rim, like, wow, you punch pretty hard, but I punch a little bit harder. No. How does God defeat the devil? Well, how does light conquer the darkness? By showing up, right? In other words, there's an incommensurable, infinite power on display in the resurrection. We strain to see how any good could possibly outweigh all the suffering, all the stress, all the despair, heck, all the hunger, all the stubbed toes. It's just senseless violence and nonsensical war and chaos. And we strain to see, God, when will it be? When will you show up? In the light of the resurrection, we have the ultimate victory of God. And what he's saying, I think, to you and me, this one who wears the crown, you want to see the light of the kingdom? You want to share in the glory of God? Cling to a communion with me so that you might go where I go. Because the king reigns. What we see in him is the first fruits. But the full harvest is in all of us, the members of his body. Where do we go? The same way as Christ the head, provided we're united to him. We're grafted onto him. And so I want to close and open with questions and say a word of prayer, but not before we see this. What we look at on the shroud isn't just his story. It's ours. The shroud gives us the image of a man who doesn't just remain in death, but passes through it unto glory. And the fathers of the church sum it up in 4 words. Per crucem ad lucem. Right? Through the cross to the light. Today's gospel. Was it not necessary that the Son of God, the Messiah, suffer so as to enter into glory? Friends, the only bridge to heaven is the cross. The Savior is the only way to salvation. And this is poignant. That when we look to the image that natural eyes can see, we see dimly as in a mirror. But aren't we called to look with a new set of eyes? To see the light of the resurrection? To understand that his victory is for those who have eyes to see, for those who have ears to hear, for those who choose to be subject to King Jesus, the King of Kings. He wears not a gilded crown. He doesn't have a palace on, 5th Avenue, but instead sits at the right hand of the Father, but comes on the clouds of heaven for those who say amen to King Jesus. If we say amen, we'll go where he goes. That's why he said, he who does not take up his cross daily isn't worthy of me. But he who takes up his cross, Jesus took up a cross. When have you ever suffered in such a way as this? I stub my toe, and he calls it the cross is the instrument of salvation. And yet he gives you and me the dignity of being cross bearers, sharers in his redemptive work. How is that possible? Well, if he's dead, it isn't. But if he lives, and he comes to us by the power of the Holy Spirit, then we can do what is naturally impossible, but is supernaturally not only possible, but it's what's commanded by Christ himself. And that's good news. All right, you've been patient. Let me open it up for questions. You've been so good. Yes, sir, in the back. Scream it out.
We believe in the authenticity of the shroud. But
Okay.
Is it a relevant question to ask about the chain of custody?
Sure.
Of the shroud?
Absolutely. Is it a relevant? By the way, if you need to go, feel free. I'm not going to be embarrassed. But I will stay for until, let's say, 8 o'clock for those who want to do questions. Chain of custody. Yes, here's what you got to know. There are two kinds of evidences. That which is an unbroken chain, and then those which are touch points. So this is from the ancient world, right? So we shouldn't be surprised that the chain of custody, if you're asking about an unbroken chain, goes all the way back to 1355. Then prior to that, we do have very important evidences of its existence. So I'm thinking especially of the Pantokrator of Mount Sinai from the 6th century, and the Hungarian Praecodex, which dates very precisely to the year 1195. All right, so in the 6th century, it's likely in Edessa, in modern-day Turkey. In the 1192, it's likely in Constantinople. All right, here's the total itinerary, very brief. This is a whole course, by the way, over the course of a semester. Here's the cliff notes in like 30 seconds. Jesus is, of course, dead and rising in 33 AD or thereabouts, right? And it's in the year 90 or 100 that John writes his gospel, and he speaks so extensively about the shroud, telling you the importance that the shroud still has some 60 years after the events recorded. Now, what happens next? We have the legend of Abgar. This is a pagan king who has leprosy, but hears of Jesus' healing powers, and it's Thaddeus Jude who brings the image of the Savior on a cloth. And when he venerates this image, he is healed of his leprosy. He becomes a Christian. But his son then takes the throne after him and reverts to paganism, and the Christians that were flourishing at the time go into hiding along with their shroud. And it's not seen again for some centuries, because in 525 there's a flood in Edessa, and now they're reconstructing the city walls in 544, and this image is rediscovered and now venerated. And there it stays for another 4 centuries, but in 944 it's Romanus I, emperor in Constantinople, who wants to gather together all the instruments of the Passion, all the relics of Christ. And so he brings them to modern-day Istanbul. And we have coins minted in this year with the face of the Pantokrator that maps onto our image of the face. Okay, then it's in 1204 that you have the Fourth Crusade, and European crusaders come to Constantinople, appropriate the shroud, and walk away with it. But once a number of years have passed, 150 of them, now it's on display in northern France in the town of Lire, and it's Geoffroy de Charny who has, and now we have documentation, we have coins that are minted or medallions, some of them fished out of the River Seine in 1900 that show the crest of the de Charny family and his wife Margaret, I think it is, and then the empty sepulcher in the middle, the herringbone weave, the dorsal image, the ventral image. Nobody doubts that what Geoffroy has is what we call the Shroud of Turin. We know every baby step of this cloth after this moment. That's where we get the unbroken chain of custody. It goes down through the descendants of his family until they run out of descendants, and so they sell it, the great-granddaughter. sells it for 2 castles. Can you imagine? It goes south to Chambéry in 1453. The fire of 1532 happens there. It's in 1578 that now Charles Borromeo is going to cross the mountains that today separate France from Italy. And they said, no, look, you're in your old age, don't traverse these mountains. We'll bring it to you, just bring it back. But he died. It never was brought back. It's stayed in Turin to this day. So, in summary, it went from Jerusalem to Edessa to Constantinople, then Lire, then Chambéry, and then Turin. Some argue that it was also in Antioch. I'll let the historians duke that one out. But you see how there are touch points prior to even this unbroken chain. If I had the slide, and I wish I could tell you, I think it's slide, is it 67? I'll look for this is my computer here somewhere. I'll take the next question before I show you the Humberto Pray Code. If there was someone over here, yes, young man, here with it. Oh, go ahead. Get you next. Oh, yes, yes, the patibulum. Yes, so on the shroud, what you see is excoriations on the right shoulder. It's easier to see on the photo negative. So the right shoulder and the left shoulder blade, can you see this area right here? Precisely where the scapular sticks out, where the shoulder blade, think of the contours of the back. Just like men who work on the railroad, they carry these big beams, a third of the weight is in front of them, 2/3 behind. That patibulum, in the first century literature, does say that the victim was made to carry the horizontal beam only. See, the Mount Calvary gets its name, Golgotha, because it means the place of the skull. It's the habitual place of execution. It likely is littered by skulls on the ground. So the same wood was used again and again for various victims. So the fixture that brings together the vertical beam and the horizontal cross beam is already in place. Okay, that's important because it means that the holes are already there. The fixture is already there that would bind them together. They're not going to make their life difficult by planting the beam every single time. These poor Romans have to, it's so much work killing men, right? No, so they would keep it planted in the ground, and then a man on either side of the post would just hoist him up once the nails were in both hands, and then lift him 6 inches off the ground, maybe 12. We know this, by the way, because the angle of the spear is not oblique. It's not as if they're on their tippy toes stretching to reach him to pierce. He's almost at eye level because the blow is almost parallel to the ground. Okay, so that tells us about the beam. It also tells us that it corresponds with the first century literature, the patibulum. First of all, what would it weigh if it were the T-cross? Some 325 pounds. There ain't no way you're carrying from the site of sentencing to Calvary. Look, Jesus can't even carry the patibulum. Do you remember they have to enlist, Simon of Cyrene, thank you. That poor guy is in the wrong place at the wrong time, collides with Christ, and is now made to carry the cross. As Jesus walks in front. By the way, there's a beautiful imagery of discipleship. Right? What does it mean? Jesus walks in front, and he carries the brunt. Remember what he says? My load is light, the burden, right? He takes the brunt of it, but Simon is walking behind Jesus. In other words, in his line of sight is Jesus first, and he carries the light load, the one that weighs 100 pounds. But what's the freight on Jesus' back? The sins of all the world, right? And so they realized that he would die if they didn't get help. That tells us how badly he was beaten before he ever got to the cross. Do you remember Pontius Pilate is surprised? They asked for permission to take him down, and they get it. But you could last days on the cross. Jesus is so badly beaten between the scourging and everything that happens on Thursday night that by the time he gets up there, look, there's men on the right and the left. They're still alive. Why is Jesus dead first? Well, because he's beaten so badly. The lung edema, right? We see this in the proportion of water to blood, right? There's lung edema is when there's water in the lungs, And that is exactly the upshot of being a beaten. By the way, I failed to finish a thread that I opened. Do you remember I was telling you about the bilirubin in the blood and the red color? Did I say this? Bilirubin is the effect of being beaten, being scourged. And this excess of bilirubin leaves even ancient blood perpetually red. When Barry Schwartz heard that from his Jewish immunologist friends, he said, "That's it. I've got nothing left. This has got to be authentic." Yes, sir, over here.
The shroud is basically a linen cloth. Now, does science tell us anything about the age
Of the cloth. Does science tell us anything about the age of the cloth? Yes, there are at least 5 tests that have been done that tell us, that point to its 1st century origin. All right, one of them is called wide-angle X-ray scattering. And this is some of the most recent studies that have been done. But the one that's most famous, sadly, is the one that we know to be debunked. And this happened in 1988. Have you heard about the radiocarbon dating? If you notice, I didn't mention it. And the reason why is because today there's an international scholarly consensus that what they claimed to know is untenable today. Here's what happened. They cut away 8 centimeters here from this top left corner. They divvied it up into 2 portions. Half of it stayed on reserve in Turin. The other 4 centimeters get diced up and given to Arizona, Zurich, and Oxford. And then when they cut that 3rd strip, they realized, oops, Arizona didn't get a big enough strip. We need to cut a 2nd strip. It's called Arizona 2. There's a difference, there's a distance between Arizona 1 and Arizona 2 of just 2 centimeters. What do you think the difference in the date is in that measure? This they didn't tell you in 1989 when they published the results of the test that took place the year prior. But what they did publish is this. We're 95% sure that the whole of the cloth dates to the years 1260 to 1390, exclamation mark. This was Dr. Michael Tite of the British Museum and his front page news all over the world. The Shroud is a medieval fake, and we know it to be. If you still believe in the Shroud's authenticity after this moment, you probably believe the Earth is flat too. Like you were in that category. You were so silly. But now, 30 years later, a French researcher by the name of Tristan Casabianca files a Freedom of Information Act, compelling the individual laboratories to reveal what they suppressed for 3 decades, namely the individual punctual results for each individual strip. See, when you do carbon dating, you have to carbonize, you have to burn, and then count the C12 and the C14, the 2 isotopes of carbon, and then compare and contrast. It tells you how fast the C14, that's radioactive, decayed to C12. We know its half-life to be 5,370 years. It's an easy calculation, provided that the sample is pure. But look what happened here. In this case, each individual strip is different. The youngest date is 1240. The youngest date is 1440. Think of this. The gap of 2 centimeters represents a difference of 200 years. It's not just that, it's worse. It's a linear function. It gets progressively younger as you move left to right. In the span of 2 centimeters, it's 200 years. Tell me, friends, if we continue this linear function for 4.4 meters, what date do we get here? A date in the far future? Like, whatever the date might be, I'm pretty sure it's not a date from the future, right? This date nobody told you. In 2019, now they publish in peer-reviewed archaeometry. Guess where that publication hails from? Oxford. The very same institute claiming that it's medieval is now claiming that's an untenable conclusion. So again, it's not Father Andrew's personal opinion. It's not even that of Shroud authenticists. even those who think the shroud inauthentic no longer use that argument if they're publishing in this field today, because it's a bad argument. And yet it's still widely spread on TikTok, right? And so if that's where you get your information, be careful. All right, I'm sure you can say more about that. Yes, ma'am.
Whatever happened to the face cloth?
Whatever happened to the face cloth? We know about that, yeah. It's in Spain. It's in Oviedo in Spain. It's called the Sudarium of Oviedo. If you go to our exhibit in Rome or in Jerusalem or in a couple other dozen, you can see facsimiles of that. You can see the real thing. Twice a year, it's on display. I think it's the feast of like St. Thomas Aquinas, and then on September 14th, the exaltation of the cross. Yeah, and so how did it get there? Well, does it have images on it? No, it has a blood stain, which tells us how the cloth was used. So when they take out the nails in the hands, the head is allowed to hang, and now all the blood comes out through the nasal and oral passages, soaking the beard. And this cloth, which was folded in half, and then it's just pressed to the face. So when you unfold it, you see a line of symmetry, and you get the blood stains twice. Here's what's interesting. When you superimpose those amorphous blood stains on top of the face of the man of the shroud, it's especially interesting. See that three-shaped rivulet? And then just underneath you see a teardrop shape? Well, on the shroud, you can see the rim of it, but it's empty in the middle. On the Sudarium, not only do these amorphous shapes align, but what's empty on the shroud is filled in by the Sudarium. Oh, and it's the same type of blood. So at least 3 immunologists, Heller and Adler in the United States, Baima Bologna in Italy, say that this is human blood, male blood, and AB blood. More recently, Dr. Kelly Kurse here in America has called into question the definitiveness of that conclusion, which is the way of science, right? One scientist says one thing, another says, actually, I want more proof. That's fine, I'm all for it. I'm just saying at least 3 different immunologists come to the same conclusion, that the same body is covered by 2 cloths. Why doesn't it have the image on it? Well, it seems that what's touching his body in the moment of the resurrection is only the shroud. What's the one piece of evidence we know about how a Sudarium is used in Lazarus' case? The verb is peri. You know what peri means? A perimeter is what's around, right? Wrapped around? No, bound around. Peri deo. So I think the shroud is around him, again, kind of like that taco, right? But then in addition to that, we have these linen strips at the level of the shins. We have a separation here at the below the knees, but above the. It seems that there's a crease from linen strips binding the legs together. According to the American scientists, there's a depression in the beard, evidence of a chin strap. Maybe the Sudarium is not only over his face, but tied around it, outside of the shroud. Now, all we know is what's written. And what's written is that when it's discovered on Sunday morning, they tell us it had been on his head. Well, now it's apart. Now it's rolled up. Now it's folded up. And so you can only speculate about what happened in between. Do you see? And so here's one thing I will point out. On the shroud, there's a gap between the frontal image and the dorsal image. So you can see it here. You see how I can't see the top of the dorsal image from the side. Careful, that's a water stain. That's not the back of his head, right? He's not thin as a piece of cardboard, right? So that's a water stain that kind of looks like a U shape, right? But if you see the back of the head, it's way over here. This is where the blood stains are. Okay, so why is there a gap? And by the way, why don't we see the sides of the legs or the plane on which the ears sit? This is where I think we have evidence of the aloe and myrrh. That's on the side. That allows for the cloth to lie flat. We don't have a distortion in the image of the body. We don't have what's called the Agamemnon effect, right? Think of this. If you have your ears on parallel planes, and now I take a cloth and I wrap it not just over the face, but also around the sides, paste it to the body. Well, then when I unfurl the cloth, don't I get Mickey Mouse ears, right, on either side? That you don't see that. And so it seems that the cloth is like a table, like a mirror. And that's easily accounted for if there's something aligning the body, left and right. It's exactly what the Gospels describe. And so I think that's the best picture there. So why don't we see anything on the top of the head or the sides of the body? Because maybe pellets or bags or boxes or pottery that holds these aloes and myrrhs, look, they looked for aloe and myrrh. They found no trace of it. Many people imagine that the body was anointed on Friday night. Where does it say that in the Bible? It doesn't say that. What it does say is that Mary Magdalene and these women on Sunday morning are going to anoint. Well, go figure. Evidently, that job wasn't done already. Otherwise, there'd be no need to do it. So remember, time's running out. There's darkness at least from 12 to 3. Then, sometime after, we know not how long, he gave a loud shout and dies. Then they have to ask permission. Buy a linen cloth. Carry him 140 feet. Take out the nails. Carry him to the cave. Tuck him away. There's not time before the Sabbath is initiated by the third star in the sky. They're going to keep the rest on the Sabbath, which is a solemn high feast that day, by the way, the third day of Passover week. And so they come back on Sunday, but the body isn't there. In other words, it seems that the body became mechanically transparent, and like light through a window pane, exits out. I failed to mention this, but I'll say it now. Underneath the bloodstain, there is no body image. This is one of those minimal facts that is very hard to account for if there isn't a resurrection. Think of this. If I give you the task, I want you to make a burial cloth, make it just like Jesus's. Tell me, are you going to start by drawing the shape of the body and then adding the bloodstains? Or would you maybe start with a blank sheet and say, I'm going to do all the bloodstains. Here's going to be the feet, here's going to be the head, here are the hands. Can you imagine if after the fact that the bloodstains are already there, and now you have to draw the body? Can you imagine what happens if the neck needs to be like that of a giraffe, just so they can reach the bloodstain that you painted too far away? There's no way you would do that. You would start with the frame of the body, and then add the bloodstains on top. The result of that would be you would have layers. On the bottom, the image of the body, the bloodstain on top of it. But this is what's not on the shroud. See, where the bloodstains are, they coat the surface of the fibers. And those fibers are not available to receive the light that comes later. Do you see that? So it makes sense on the narrative that we get from the gospel. First, a bloodstained body is in contact on Friday night. There's no image yet. That comes after the blood has been transferred from the cadaver into the cloth. This evidence coincides with the narrative of resurrection. The light of the resurrection happens after the burial on Friday. But it doesn't coincide with the theory of human artistry. Yes, ma'am, you're patient.
Okay. I read about the shroud as well as blood stains that was on some of the Eucharist that was saved for years through the church.
Yes.
And I read that when they did the DNA, now that we have the equipment to do that, of the blood, it showed that it had the mother's chromosome of X.
Yes,
And
I've heard this
showed
too.
no Y chromosome.
I wish there were
which would
evidence
be
for
the
this, but there's
father.
just not. This is what's on TikTok, and you have to be very careful. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that we created a postgraduate certificate that carefully curates the information that is given, right? Because sometimes people want to, and I don't know why, they feel the need to overstate when the evidence that is peer-reviewed is already so powerful. I'm always under the gun, right? And if Father Andrew overstates anything, I'll hear about it, right? And so I don't want people to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And this is why we have to keep our credibility by not overstating beyond what the evidence bears. right? And so, yes, there is material components of blood. Yes, we can point to proteins and hemoglobin and bilirubin and serum albumin, etc. But we do not have, in this degenerated blood, a full genome, right? That's just not possible because blood decomposes over time, and that's not the state in which we can read this information. And likewise, I have to say, look, I'm a believer in the real, substantial, sacramental presence of Christ in the Eucharist. But it's sad to say that sometimes there hasn't been a rigorous protocol by which we document some of these miracles. And look, I have a friend who was a chemist and an atheist. She is now studying her doctorate and has become a Catholic. And she's studying metaphysics and Thomistic philosophy and theology in Europe. But has noted that a lot of this documentation for the Eucharistic miracles lacks credibility to some extent, and that we have to be cautious about overstating. If we're truth seekers, we should go where the evidence goes. I think that there are many that have said that in blood stains, I know Odoardo Lignoli studies the Lanciano miracle, for example, in the 1980s. This is a miracle from the 1200s, right? And he says that he sees myocardial tissue and that the blood has these components. Fine, I love that, go for it, but do it in a rigorous way that others can scrutinize and chime in on a conversation. Let's not leave it to some elite few that can't go back and forth. I want to say, there was a young man that I didn't take your question, or did I? No. Jeremiah Johnson, yes. Yeah. Yeah, I wish he would stop saying that. He asked me that question, and I answered it in public, and yet he's still saying the same thing, sadly. But yeah, so it seems to me that the scientists have said that, is the image fading over time? And there's nuance. I think the proper answer is the image isn't changing, but the linen is. If you have a white sheet of paper and it yellows, well, that's something that's happening to the substrate. But what's on it? The image is monochromatic and it's staying the same, right? But the white linen is oxidizing. Look, with light and with the gases in the atmosphere, it yellows. And because the contrast between a caramel color of the image and the linen that yellows, that is diminishing. The contrast is diminishing, so it feels like the image is fading. But I think that lacks nuance. This is one of the reasons that all of the efforts of the church recently have been to preserve the cloth for future generations. I'm saddened to see the way Jeremiah Johnson is kind of smearing the Catholic Church, when the Catholic Church is the very institute that is promoting the shroud. And through these dark ages of controversy over carbon dating, the church has been preserving it and making gargantuan efforts to see that our children and children's children get to see this shroud too. I'm happy though that it's going on Sean Ryan and spreading about the shroud. Yes, sir.
I've heard that in anticipation a nail is one's hand. Which allows the weight of your body
Right.
to support the strip through the hand, and that the nail is actually penetrated in the wrist.
That's right.
And looking at my camera, it looks like the glove box is not in the hand, but actually in the camera.
Well, where is the nail in the hand? It looks like it's not in the hand, but in the wrist, he says. It's important to know that from a medical point of view, and just from common parlance, the hand, everything after the radius and ulnar, the forearm, this is all the hand. It's composed of the phalanges, the carpals, and the metacarpals. Okay, so all of those bones constitute the hand. But where is the nail? We've imagined, because we read in the Bible, it says cheros, it says hand. And we just imagined the center. Where does it say that? Well, it doesn't get that specific. We imagined it. And yet, in our churches, always and everywhere, or almost, it's right here that we imagine it. And yet it's not possible to hold half the weight of a human body, even for 10 minutes, because this is all soft tissue. And there's no transversal support. You would slip right through if the nail were here. in short time. And so the shroud does something so daring and gives us something that none of us expected, but which actually holds up to scrutiny, because you could last several days. Look, there was a question, because it says in Scripture, not a bone shall be broken. Do you remember how that's hearkening back to Exodus and the unblemished lamb of the Passover meal in Exodus 12? Oh, thank you, by the way. Wow, we gotta hire this guy. That was good. So the nail, as we see it on the shroud, it goes through on one side. We see where it exits out the other. Look, this is where it exits out. But where did it go in? If you want to see the spot, put your thumb and your pinky together and bend all the way down. And then under this thenar furrow, see the muscle in the thumb gets flexed. And then right there is a divot where it goes in. That is where it will go through what's called Desto's space or Z space in the metacarpals. Okay, and it passes out 1.5 centimeters higher on the opposite side, closer to the shoulder on the other side. Precisely where the ulnar nerve and the median nerve pass through. So this is tremendous to think about. He is rotating around his wrist, and we know it because there's 2 flows of blood from that one wound in the hands. Look, if he's staying still, there'd be 1 stream of blood as blood drips down according to gravity. But he's twisting. He has to, because that's the only way you can breathe. Because when you're hanging, what that does is it forces the muscles between the ribs into a position. Look, when you breathe in, and then when you breathe out, see if I can relax those muscles when I let my hands go low. But if they're fixed high, all I can do is press on the nail in my feet and pull and twist on the nail in my hands, and thereby rise up, relax the intercostal muscles to facilitate respiration. And this for 3 to 6 hours, he's going up and down, and we know it because the bifurcation pattern is not just here, but all the blood that's trickled down the forearm is splitting as if there's 2 main positions, 1 low, 1 high. This is extremely complex, and think about it. Now he's in the tomb. His arms are forced down, but they bear witness to when he was on the cross, low and high, low and high. This is the kind of thing that a con artist could never get right. And yet, it's what we see on the shroud with such detail. All right, gosh, you guys are real. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I'll continue next one. Yeah. The triangular areas? Yeah, so if you can see on this particular image, this is when the patches over the holes from the fire of 1532 were still in place. As of 2002, I believe it is, they're taken off, and now if you see more modern photos, you'll see the empty space. But this is important to explain. See, it's inside of a silver case and folded up, and in the fire, that silver melts down and singes only the outer edges of the folded cloth. So when you unfold it, you get the scorch marks as you see them here. Do you know what is different? These holes. You see 1, 2, 3 right there? And then look, again, 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are prior to 1192. Do you remember the gentleman that asked earlier and I told him about the Hungarian Prayer Codex? On that particular illuminated manuscript, we see not only